Imagine this. You wake up in a quiet room. The light outside is soft, pale, like the world itself hasn't decided to exist yet. On the nightstand sits a mirror, not a large one, just a small, circular thing, the kind that magnifies every detail. You look into it, expecting the usual face, familiar, somewhat tired, but yours. Yet today, something feels wrong. Your reflection looks back with an expression that isn't quite yours. The corners of your mouth hold a shadow of contempt. Your eyes glint with something feral, a judgment, maybe even disgust. And for a fleeting moment, you sense it, that you are not entirely who you think you are. You blink, shake your head, laugh it off. But deep down, something stirs a strange awareness, a question forming at the edges of your mind. What part of me is looking back? We like to believe that we know ourselves, our thoughts, our morals, our desires. We build our identity like a house, brick by brick, until we can live comfortably inside the illusion of stability. We say things like, "I'm a good person, I'd never do that. I know what I want." Yet, beneath those declarations lies a silent truth. Most of what we are remains hidden, buried in the dark soil of the unconscious. You've met this darkness before, in the sudden flash of jealousy when a friend succeeds, in the quiet resentment that blooms when someone questions you, in the shame you feel but never confess. It appears in your dreams, your impulses, your unspoken fantasies. You suppress it, rationalize it, call it just stress or just a bad day. But it's always there, the part of you that doesn't fit your self-image, the one you keep locked behind the mask. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the unacknowledged, repressed aspects of the psyche that we refuse to see. He warned that whatever remains unconscious will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Think about that for a moment, that the choices you make, the people you attract, the chaos you repeat, all might be guided by a hidden hand, one that lives inside you. The question, then, is terrifying in its simplicity. What if you are not who you think you are? Modern culture doesn't like this question. It prefers the illusion of clarity, self-improvement without self-confrontation, positivity without pain, light without shadow. We scroll through motivational quotes, talking about becoming our best selves, yet few of us dare to meet the parts of ourselves that are inconvenient, shameful, or cruel. We chase healing but flee from honesty. We seek love but hide our wounds. We polish the mirror, hoping the reflection will change, never realizing that the stain is within. But the darkness does not disappear because you ignore it. It waits, it festers. It takes new forms in addictions, obsessions, projections, and compulsions. You may believe you've evolved past your fears, yet they find new disguises. You may preach compassion while quietly resenting those who remind you of your own weakness. You may seek control over your life, yet remain enslaved by the very impulses you deny. There is a brutal irony here. The more you suppress the dark, the more power it gains over you. Like a shadow under the sun, the brighter the light of your ego, the sharper and darker the outline it casts. The dark side is not evil in itself, it is simply the part of you that has been banished. Your anger, your lust, your envy, your capacity for violence, these are not strangers. They are the exiled children of your own soul, locked away to preserve the illusion of purity. But how long can one live in exile from oneself? Imagine walking through life carrying a stranger inside you, one who whispers in moments of weakness, who sabotages your efforts, who delights in your failures. You pretend not to hear it, but you do. Every time you lash out, every time you lie to yourself, every time you find yourself repeating the same painful patterns, that voice wins. And the tragedy is that this stranger is not your enemy, it is you, crying out to be seen. The paradox of the human psyche is that what you most fear to face is exactly where your freedom lies. To confront the dark side of your mind is not to destroy it, but to understand it. It's to see that within your rage lies the seed of passion, within your fear lies courage, within your pain lies depth. What you repress does not vanish, it transforms. And if you refuse to face it consciously, it will return unconsciously, as fate, as neurosis, as the quiet despair that gnaws at the edges of your joy. Ask yourself, when was the last time you truly looked within, without judgment or justification? Could you sit with your envy, your arrogance, your guilt, not to punish them, but to listen? Could you admit that the person you condemn in others might reflect something unresolved in you? These are dangerous questions, because if you answer them honestly, your identity begins to unravel. You begin to see how much of your life has been an elaborate performance, a way to hide from what you secretly know. You begin to realize that morality, success, and even love can become masks, beautiful disguises worn to conceal the shadow. And yet, There's something liberating in that realization. The moment you stop pretending, the moment you stop policing your own humanity, something shifts. You start to feel whole, not perfect, but real. The shadow loses its monstrous shape and becomes something human, something that belongs. The great question remains, what happens when you turn toward the darkness instead of away from it? What happens when you dare to meet the parts of yourself you've spent a lifetime rejecting? What if the path to peace is not through denial, but through descent into the very depths you were taught to fear? That's where the journey begins. In the dim corridors of the psyche, where light and shadow are no longer enemies, but partners in your becoming. And to walk that path, to truly confront the dark side of your mind, you must first understand why it exists, where it came from, and what it's been trying to tell you all along. That's where we go next. The dark side of your mind did not appear out of nowhere. It was not born from evil, nor crafted by some external force that delights in your torment. It emerged from necessity, from the primal urge to survive, to belong, to be loved. Every shadow begins as light denied. Every hidden impulse is the ghost of something once innocent. When you were a child, you came into the world as something whole, raw, instinctive, curious. You felt everything deeply: anger, joy, jealousy, tenderness, all moved through you like weather through an open sky. But the world quickly began to shape you. It whispered rules: don't cry, don't be angry, don't want too much, don't be too loud, don't be too different. You learned that love was conditional, that approval had a price, and so you began the quiet surgery of self-denial, cutting away the parts of you that didn't fit the picture others wanted to see. Carl Jung once wrote that the creation of the self is a sacrificial act. You cannot become who you are meant to be without first losing who you were told to be. But that sacrifice is rarely conscious. Most people spend their lives serving an invisible master, the inner judge, the inherited voice of the collective, the cultural conscience that dictates what is acceptable. That voice is not your own. It is the echo of your upbringing, your society, your fears of rejection. And beneath that voice lies the shadow, the collection of everything you had to suppress in order to survive love. It's ironic, isn't it, that the very qualities that make you human, your anger, your hunger, your desire to assert yourself, are often the ones you've been taught to fear. You are told they make you selfish, dangerous, unworthy. But when you exile those parts of yourself, you don't become good. You become divided. You wear a mask of virtue while a storm brews underneath. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche saw this division as the origin of weakness in modern man. He spoke of resentment, the poisonous emotion that arises when natural instincts are repressed and moralized into submission. When a person cannot express their will openly, that energy turns inward, becoming envy, guilt, or self-hatred. The sick are the greatest danger to man, Nietzsche wrote, not the evil. Because the sick soul, the one that denies its instincts, becomes cunning. It moralizes, manipulates, condemns others, to avoid facing its own impotence. You can see it everywhere today: moral outrage that hides insecurity, virtue signaling that disguises emptiness, and the quiet desperation behind endless self-improvement. Modern people are not evil, they are fragmented. They spend their lives chasing light, while pretending not to see the darkness dragging behind them. They confuse goodness with avoidance, peace with numbness, spirituality with denial. Arthur Schopenhauer, ever the pessimist, believed that life itself was driven by an irrational force, the will to live, a blind, ceaseless striving that condemns humanity to perpetual dissatisfaction. For Schopenhauer, the human mind is not ruled by reason, but by desire. We like to think we are rational beings, but in truth, reason is just the servant of the will, a clever narrator justifying what our instincts already decided. This is where the shadow hides most effectively, in the stories you tell yourself. Every time you say, "I'm fine," when you're not. Every time you say, "I don't care," when you do. Every time you justify staying in situations that slowly destroy you, the shadow smiles. Because the lie is its language. You build your identity out of stories designed to protect your ego from pain, but those same stories imprison you. The mind becomes a labyrinth where truth and illusion are indistinguishable, and the minotaur at the center is your own reflection. Jung believed that the unconscious is not merely a storage room for repressed material. It's alive, intelligent, and purposeful. The shadow doesn't exist to torment you. It exists to balance you. It contains the instincts and emotional truths your conscious mind cannot integrate. When ignored, it sabotages your life. When acknowledged, it becomes the source of vitality, creativity, and authenticity. But society teaches the opposite. It teaches suppression, distraction, and conformity. It rewards masks over depth, performance over presence. We are told to curate our image, to optimize ourselves, to avoid discomfort at all costs. In doing so, We become spiritual amputees half alive, chasing dopamine while starving for meaning. Jean-Paul Sartre once said, "Man is condemned to be free." Freedom, for Sartre, was both a gift and a curse. You are not bound by destiny, you are bound by choice. But freedom terrifies the ego, because it comes with responsibility. It means acknowledging that your suffering is, in part, self-created, that you have built your own prison brick by brick. It means that the dark side of your mind is not an invader, but a mirror reflecting what you refuse to own. Aldous Huxley, in Brave New World, warned of a society that avoids pain so thoroughly that it loses its humanity. Happiness, he wrote, is never grand. In our pursuit of comfort and convenience, we have sterilized the soul. We medicate emotions, replace introspection with entertainment, and call our numbness peace. But a tranquilized life is not a fulfilled one. The shadow feeds on avoidance. The more you sedate your discomfort, the more it grows in silence. There's a quiet violence in this collective repression. Look around: anxiety disorders, addictions, compulsive distractions. We have become masters at running from ourselves. Our technologies, our consumer habits, even our relationships all become tools of evasion. We call it progress, but it's just more elaborate camouflage. And yet, the psyche never forgets. The shadow always finds a way to surface. Sometimes it comes as depression, the body's rebellion against the false self. Sometimes as anger, the soul's protest against submission. Sometimes as obsession, the unconscious trying to complete a story your conscious mind abandoned. You might think you're in control, but often it's the opposite. The choices you make, the people you attract, the chaos you repeat, these are the fingerprints of your shadow. You are drawn to situations that mirror what you've repressed, as if life itself were conspiring to show you what you refuse to see. Jung called this enantiodromia, the tendency of things to turn into their opposites. Suppress rage, and you'll meet it in others. Deny desire, and it will haunt you through temptation. Reject vulnerability, and you'll find yourself surrounded by walls of loneliness. The shadow doesn't punish, it educates. Pain is its language. Repetition is its lesson plan. And if you ignore the lesson, life repeats it louder, harsher, more unavoidable each time. So ask yourself, what is the shadow trying to show you? What patterns keep returning, not because life is cruel, but because you are asleep? The hidden problem is not that darkness exists within you, it's that you've been taught to see it as an enemy. You've been conditioned to fear your own depths, to treat half of your humanity as contamination. But until you reclaim that half, you will never be whole. You will keep living in exile, bright on the surface, broken underneath. And so the question deepens: if the shadow is not evil, but essential, then what happens when we refuse it? What becomes of a society built on repression, denial, and distraction? The answer lies in what happens next, in the unseen consequences of this collective amnesia, where the dark side, denied for too long, begins to rule from below. You can suppress the darkness for years, even decades, and it will remain quiet at first. But make no mistake, it never sleeps. It waits, and when it returns, it doesn't come back as a whisper. It comes back as the storm that tears your carefully constructed identity to pieces. You see it in the burnout of people who once called themselves high achievers. You see it in the silent misery of those who have everything, yet feel hollow. You see it in the public meltdowns, the addictions, the endless search for validation. You see it in nations drunk on distraction, in cultures addicted to outrage, in individuals who mistake stimulation for purpose. This is what happens when the dark side of the mind takes control from the shadows. At first, the signs are subtle: irritability, fatigue, restlessness, a quiet dread that hums beneath every accomplishment. The voice of the shadow begins as a whisper: this isn't you. But you drown it out with noise, with work, with entertainment, with endless scrolling through lives more curated than your own. You tell yourself you're just tired. You tell yourself you're fine. And all the while, something inside decays. The human psyche is like a neglected garden. The weeds, envy, resentment, lust, fear, are not evil in themselves, but left unattended, they choke the soil. They grow wild, invasive, feeding off the nutrients meant for life. You can trim them endlessly, but unless you dig into the roots, the reasons, the pain, they'll keep returning. Carl Jung warned that, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. The tragedy is that this truth plays out everywhere. The addict thinks fate cursed them with weakness. But what if addiction is the shadow's cry for connection? The narcissist believes they are entitled to admiration. But what if their arrogance hides a buried sense of worthlessness? The anxious person fears losing control, Yet, what if the fear itself is the shadow demanding surrender, a reminder that control was never real? Every symptom is a story disguised as suffering. And yet, society doesn't want to listen to these stories. It wants productivity. It wants efficiency. It wants people who can function, not feel. So we medicate the psyche, we diagnose, label, and categorize human pain as malfunction, a chemical imbalance to be managed, not a message to be understood. We call it progress, but perhaps it's just an elegant form of suppression. Aldous Huxley foresaw this when he imagined a world where people would love their servitude. A world where suffering was medicated into silence, where discomfort was treated as disease. He understood something profound. If you can numb the shadow, you can control the person. A mind that never questions its own imprisonment becomes easy to govern by corporations, by ideologies, by algorithms whispering what to desire next. This is the collective consequence of personal repression. What begins as an individual's avoidance becomes a society's pathology. When people refuse to confront their darkness, it spills outward into culture, politics, religion, and war. The personal becomes systemic. History is a graveyard of repressed shadows. The atrocities of the 20th century totalitarian regimes, genocides, ideological fanaticism were not born from external evil, but from the internal blindness of ordinary men. Jung saw it clearly during World War II. The greatest danger to humanity, he wrote, is not bombs or weapons, but the psychic epidemic. When entire societies project their unacknowledged darkness onto an enemy, they become possessed by it. Look closer, and you'll see the same pattern repeating today, only more subtly. We don't burn witches or wage crusades in the old way. We just destroy reputations online. We don't build concentration camps. We build digital echo chambers that reinforce our purity and demonize dissent. We don't kneel before priests. We kneel before influencers, political idols, and curated ideals of perfection. It's the same psychological mechanism, projection, just dressed in modern clothes. Projection is the mind's way of outsourcing guilt. Whatever you refuse to see in yourself, you will inevitably see in others. You hate arrogance because it reminds you of your own hidden pride. You condemn greed because you fear your own hunger. You ridicule the weak because you can't tolerate your own vulnerability. This is why societies polarize, not because of differences, but because of mutual denial. Each side mirrors what the other represses, and the more we project, the more fragmented we become. This fragmentation isn't just psychological, it's existential. The person who lives in denial of their shadow cannot experience wholeness. They might appear successful, confident, even enlightened, but something vital is missing. Authenticity. Every action becomes performative, every opinion a mask, every emotion a negotiation between the image they uphold and the truth they fear. It's no wonder that anxiety and depression have become the new epidemics. We are not sick because we are weak, we are sick because we are split. The soul cannot live divided indefinitely. When the mind refuses to face its own darkness, the body begins to carry it instead. The suppressed becomes somatic tension, illness, exhaustion, the physical manifestation of emotional denial. Gabor Mate has spent decades studying this phenomenon. He found that people who repress anger in the name of being nice often develop chronic illness. That addiction is not a disease of hedonism, but of disconnection, the attempt to fill an emotional void. That trauma is not what happens to you, but what happens inside you when you are forced to suppress who you are in order to survive. The unseen consequence, then, is not just personal suffering. It is the erosion of meaning itself. When you live cut off from your shadow, you also cut off from depth. Life becomes flat, mechanical. Pleasure loses taste. Relationships feel transactional. You may achieve goals, but they feel hollow because part of you isn't there to receive them. You can't find purpose, because purpose is not found in perfection, it's found in the integration of imperfection. Meaning is born from contrast, from the dance of light and shadow. Nietzsche understood this. He warned that in our pursuit of the good, we risk sterilizing the human spirit. His concept of the Übermensch, the higher man, was not someone who conquered others, but one who conquered himself. To become whole, one must transcend the false dichotomy of good and evil and embrace the totality of one's being. Only then can the creative, life-affirming force of the soul be unleashed. But we have done the opposite. We have built a civilization that rewards suppression and punishes depth. We admire confidence but fear introspection. We glorify good vibes only, while pathologizing grief. We sell happiness like a product and call discomfort a flaw. And in doing so, we create generations of people who smile brightly while quietly imploding. This is the real tragedy of the unexamined shadow, not that it makes you bad, but that it makes you unreal. You begin to live in a simulation of yourself, a polished avatar that smiles for the world, while your true self watches from behind the glass, unseen and unheard. Over time, this division becomes unbearable. Some people collapse inward, into depression, others lash outward, into blame or destruction. Some retreat into ideology, religion, or consumerism, but the root is always the same: the refusal to meet the self in full. The dark side of your mind will not be ignored forever. If you don't confront it consciously, it will confront you through crisis, through loss, breakdown, betrayal, illness, or disillusionment. These are not punishments, they are wake-up calls, the psyche's desperate attempts to restore balance. And so, the question changes, not why does this happen, but what do I do when it does? When the old self collapses and the shadow stands before you, what comes next? Do you run again into denial, distraction, delusion, or do you begin the rebellion? The courageous act of turning toward what you most fear and reclaiming the pieces of yourself scattered in darkness. That rebellion is where transformation begins. There comes a moment, quiet but unmistakable, when you realize that running no longer works. The distractions lose their flavor, the masks grow heavy, and the noise that once drowned the darkness now only amplifies it. You begin to sense that something inside you is dying, but perhaps what's dying is not you. Perhaps it's the illusion you've mistaken for yourself. This is the beginning of rebellion, not against society, not against others, but against the inner tyranny of avoidance. It is the moment you stop trying to fix, perfect, or purify yourself, and instead decide to face yourself. It is the radical act of honesty in a world addicted to lies. To confront the dark side of your mind is not an act of destruction, it is an act of integration. The task is not to eradicate your darkness, but to bring it into dialogue with your light. Jung called this process individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming whole. He wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." But this kind of rebellion requires courage of a different kind, not the outward heroism of conquest, but the inward bravery of surrender. Imagine descending into a cave. The air is thick, the light dim. You can't see what lies ahead, only the faint outlines of shapes your mind interprets as threats. You keep walking, even as fear whispers that you're lost. That cave is your unconscious, the realm of everything you've buried. It contains your pain, your desires, your shame, your forgotten dreams. Most turn back before they reach the bottom, but those who stay long enough to see through the dark realize something extraordinary. The monsters were never monsters, they were messengers. To break free, you must learn to listen to what the darkness is saying. Start by noticing what triggers you. Every irritation, every jealousy, every person you can't stand, these are mirrors. The things that disturb you in others are often fragments of yourself you've exiled. The arrogant boss, the manipulative friend, the lazy coworker all become teachers when you realize they point to your own unacknowledged traits. The goal is not to condone bad behavior, but to understand the energy behind your reactions. What are they showing you about yourself? This is the first act of rebellion. Self-honesty without judgment. Sit with your envy instead of masking it with moral superiority. Sit with your anger instead of spiritualizing it into detachment. Sit with your fear instead of numbing it with distractions. Watch these emotions like wild animals, fierce, unpredictable, but alive. The moment you stop resisting, they begin to reveal their purpose. Anger protects boundaries. Envy reveals desire. Fear signals attachment. Even guilt, when not distorted by shame, is a compass guiding you back to integrity. The second act of rebellion is self-ownership. You are not just a victim of circumstance, upbringing, or trauma. Yes, those forces shape you deeply, but if you stop there, you become their prisoner. True freedom begins when you take responsibility for your inner world. This doesn't mean blaming yourself for your pain. It means recognizing that healing is now your task. The world may have wounded you, but only you can choose not to let those wounds define your life. Nietzsche understood this intimately. His philosophy was a call to radical self-creation. Become who you are, he wrote, not who others expect you to be, not who your fears allow you to be. He rejected pity and conformity because he believed that greatness, not in the egoic sense, but in the soulful sense, is born from embracing one's fate, amor fati. The enlightened individual does not curse their darkness. They love it, because it is the soil from which strength grows. The third act of rebellion is integration through expression. You cannot think your way into wholeness. You must live it. The shadow does not speak the language of logic. It speaks through art, movement, ritual, and embodiment. This is why creative acts are so powerful. Painting, writing, dancing, or simply speaking your truth aloud. They give the unconscious a voice. Dostoevsky, understood this when he wrote characters that embodied the entire spectrum of human morality. He didn't sanitize the soul, he illuminated it. You might think that expressing darkness will make it stronger, but the opposite is true. What is expressed becomes integrated. What is denied becomes dangerous. When you allow the forbidden emotions to breathe, they lose their toxicity. Rage turns into power, grief turns into wisdom, desire turns into vitality. The fourth act of rebellion is solitude. Modern society fears silence because silence reveals truth. In solitude, the masks fall away. You begin to hear the faint hum of your real thoughts beneath the noise of conditioning. This is not loneliness, it is communion with yourself. Every mystic, philosopher, and artist who has glimpsed truth has walked this path of solitude. Schopenhauer, for all his pessimism, saw solitude as the only refuge for the thinking soul. A man can be himself, he wrote, only so long as he is alone. To confront your shadow, you must create space for reflection. Turn off the noise. Sit in stillness long enough for discomfort to surface. At first, it will feel unbearable. The silence will echo with regrets, fears, memories. But stay, this is the purification not of your soul, but of your awareness. You are not trying to erase the noise, only to hear it clearly. The fifth, and perhaps hardest act of rebellion is forgiveness. Not the kind you were taught, the moral, saintly gesture that absolves others. The deeper kind, forgiving yourself for the parts of you that fell asleep, for the choices made from fear, for the times you abandoned yourself just to belong. This forgiveness is not about erasing the past, but about reclaiming it. Every mistake, every humiliation, every shadowed corner becomes sacred once you see how it shaped your becoming. Forgiveness transforms shame into strength. Shame says, I am unworthy. Forgiveness says, I am unfinished. And finally, the sixth act of rebellion, alignment. Once you begin integrating your darkness, you stop seeking approval and start seeking truth. You begin to act not from fear, but from inner coherence. Decisions feel different, not reactive, but rooted. Relationships become mirrors for growth, not arenas for validation. You no longer chase light, you radiate it, because your light now includes your darkness. This integration is what Viktor Frankl meant when he spoke of meaning as the key to survival. He survived the horrors of the concentration camp not by denying the darkness, but by finding purpose within it. When we are no longer able to change a situation, he wrote, we are challenged to change ourselves. Meaning is not found in comfort, it is forged in confrontation. To rebel against the false self is to reclaim that meaning. It is to say, I will no longer betray myself for acceptance. I will no longer run from my own depth. I will no longer mistake compliance for peace. But know this, the rebellion never ends. The shadow does not disappear once integrated. It evolves as you evolve. Every new level of awareness reveals new darkness to be embraced. Integration is not a destination but a rhythm. Inhale and exhale, light and dark, birth and death, forever entwined. And here lies the paradox at the heart of it all. The more you confront your darkness, the more light you uncover. Not the artificial glow of positivity, but the steady fire of authenticity, the light that does not blind or burn, but warms and illuminates. When you reach this point, something profound shifts. The war within ceases. The parts of you that once fought for dominance begin to cooperate. The mind no longer fractures under the weight of repression. You become whole, not flawless, but real. And yet, even then, a final truth remains, one that transcends rebellion, one that dissolves even the need to conquer or integrate. The truth that light and dark are not opposites at all, but two expressions of the same force consciousness unfolding itself through contrast. To grasp that truth is to awaken fully. That's where the journey leads next, beyond the struggle, beyond the rebellion, into the final realization that there was never anything to fear. There comes a stillness after the rebellion, a silence so deep that it feels like the air itself is holding its breath. You've faced the darkness, descended into the cave, confronted the stranger within. You've peeled away the layers of illusion, faced your own contradictions, and survived the collapse of the self you once clung to. And in that silence, something extraordinary happens. You begin to see that the darkness you feared was never separate from the light, that what you called shadow was only unintegrated truth. For the first time, you realize that the enemy you've been fighting all along was never real. It was your own misunderstanding, the illusion of division. Imagine standing before a vast ocean at night. The waves shimmer with reflected starlight, the horizon invisible, infinite. You feel small, but not insignificant. The water is both calm and restless, as if mirroring the dual nature of your own being. The dark sea is not evil, it is depth. It holds the light of the stars within its surface, and without the darkness, the stars would never be seen at all. This is the paradox of the psyche, that wholeness is not found in purity, but in unity. You spent years trying to escape your darkness, thinking enlightenment meant eradication. But the truth is simpler and far more profound. You cannot destroy the darkness without destroying yourself, because the darkness is part of what makes you human. It is your depth, your potential, your creative tension. It is the soil from which empathy, wisdom, and meaning grow. The shadow holds not just your pain, but your genius. Carl Jung once said, "In each of us there is another whom we do not know. That other, the one you feared, is your twin flame. Together, you are complete." When you finally embrace your shadow, something inside you relaxes, as if a war that's raged for decades suddenly finds its truce. You no longer need to defend or justify who you are. The masks fall away. The compulsive need to prove, to please, to perfect dissolves. You begin to live from a different center, one that is not split between good and bad, right and wrong, light and dark. You move from the mind to the soul, and in that movement, everything changes. You begin to see the world differently. Where you once saw enemies, you now see mirrors. Where you once saw failure, you now see initiation. Where you once saw suffering, you now see depth. You understand that every human being you meet, the cruel, the kind, the arrogant, the lost, is acting out the same inner drama you've lived. The eternal struggle to reconcile the seen and the unseen within. This is the beginning of compassion, not the shallow pity of the moral ego, but the deep empathy born from recognition. You no longer divide humanity into saints and sinners, heroes and villains. You see that everyone is both, and that the real difference is not moral but conscious. Some people act out their shadow blindly, others integrate it. You realize, too, that what we call evil is not the presence of darkness, but the absence of awareness. When a person becomes unconscious of their shadow, they are possessed by it. But when awareness returns, darkness transforms into insight, suffering into growth, destruction into creation. It becomes clear, consciousness itself is the alchemist. This is why every great spiritual tradition speaks of awakening. It is not about ascending into some perfect state of light, but about descending fully, courageously into the truth of one's humanity. Enlightenment is not the rejection of the human condition, but its illumination. When the Buddha sat beneath the Bodhi tree and faced Mara the tempter, the embodiment of illusion, he did not fight him. He touched the earth and said, "I see you." That gesture was the essence of integration. He did not banish the shadow. He recognized it. He made it conscious. That is the ultimate act of power, not domination, but awareness. The mind has spent its entire existence trying to divide life into opposites, good and bad, joy and pain, success and failure, life and death. But life was never divided, only perception was. The opposites are two ends of the same thread, and consciousness is the hand that holds them together. When you see this clearly, something miraculous happens. The fear of suffering begins to fade. You no longer cling to pleasure or resist pain, because you understand that both are movements of the same river. You stop asking life to be easy and start asking to be awake within it. This is liberation, not from life, but into life. You stop needing answers and start living the questions. You stop chasing purpose as something to find and begin embodying meaning in each breath. The need for perfection dissolves, replaced by the beauty of authenticity. You no longer measure your worth by your lightness, but by your wholeness. You become both storm and stillness, both wound and healer, both shadow and light. And in that wholeness, love returns. Not romantic love, not sentimental love, but the fundamental love that underlies existence itself. The love that sees, accepts, and unites. The love that says, everything belongs. This love is what the mystics called God, what the psychologists call integration, what the philosophers call truth. It is the realization that nothing in you was ever wrong, only misunderstood. But beware, this realization is not a comfort. It is a dismantling. Once you see that you are both the darkness and the light, the illusion of separateness collapses. You can no longer blame others for your suffering, nor worship them for your salvation. You can no longer hide behind ideology, identity, or victimhood. You see that every judgment is a confession, every resentment a mirror, every fear an invitation. You are no longer merely a person in the world. You are the world, experiencing itself through a temporary form. This is what the philosophers meant when they spoke of transcendence, not escape, but expansion. Sartre called it being for itself, the moment consciousness realizes it is not defined by its contents. You are not your thoughts, your emotions, or even your story. You are the awareness that contains them, the silent witness that sees without dividing, the ocean beneath the waves. Once you glimpse that, everything softens. The wars within end. The desire to control fades. You start to live in alignment with what is, instead of what should be. You start to trust life again, not because it is painless, but because it is whole. You might ask, what does it mean to live after awakening? It means you walk through the world differently. You no longer seek to be good, you seek to be real. You no longer chase happiness, you cultivate meaning. You no longer fear the dark, because you know it's where the light is born. You still stumble, still fall, still bleed, but each fall feels sacred, each wound purposeful. You no longer see suffering as failure, but as participation in the great unfolding of consciousness itself. You become, in the truest sense, alive, and perhaps that was the point all along, not to transcend your humanity, but to embody it completely. The dark side of your mind was never a prison. It was a teacher, stern, relentless, but devoted to your awakening. Every fear, every failure, every moment of despair was the shadow trying to pull you home. You were never meant to destroy your darkness. You were meant to dance with it, to let it teach you rhythm, balance, and depth. And now, as you stand between light and dark, no longer choosing sides but embracing both, you realize the ultimate truth, that what you call you was never one thing or another. You were always the whole. The abyss you feared was not death, it was birth. And when you finally step into that realization, you stop being merely human trying to find meaning. You become meaning itself, aware, awake, and infinitely alive.